When a dying lioness took her final breath, her mate didn't roar. He begged humans to save her. When the sun came up over the frozen Montana prairie, a lioness was dying. And beside her, a huge male lion stood in a silence no wild animal should ever know. He didn't guard her. He didn't fight. He simply waited, looking toward the distance as if asking someone to come. None of us could have imagined what would happen when we answered that call. The first light of morning spread across the Montana high prairie, stretching long, pale shadows over a land still wrapped in the quiet of night. Frost stuck to the tall grass, shining like a thin layer of glass as the sun slowly came up. Inside the monitoring cabin, where heaters hummed quietly and the smell of old coffee filled the corners, 24-year-old Theo Barnes leaned closer to the flickering wall of screens. He had already watched the herd of pronghorns drift past the riverbed, the slow shuffle of buffalo near the northern ridge, and until now, nothing unusual. The prairie always woke gently, like an old friend rising from sleep. But when motion alert 238B blinked red, his eyes focused. He tapped open the feed. A lioness lay on her side, half curled in the dry grass, her chest rising and falling in uneven, shaky waves. At first, Theo thought she was simply moving. But then her body tightened unnaturally, a violent squeeze that seemed to take every breath from her. The moment it passed, she didn't move at all. Not her tail, not her paws, not even her chest. Theo's breath caught. "Come on, breathe," he whispered to no one. The camera zoomed in slightly, and that was when he saw him, the huge lion with a dark, wind-tossed mane. Ridge, the leader of this part of the reserve, a creature known for strength, control of his territory, and a voice that could shake the valley. But Ridge wasn't roaring. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't even standing tall. Instead, he stood over the lioness like a shadow made of sadness. His head was low, his ears pinned back, his eyes locked on her still side. He nudged her once with shaking gentleness, stepping back as if afraid that touching her too hard might break her completely. Theo had never seen anything like that. Not from Ridge, not from any lion. Jesus, what happened out there? He grabbed the radio, fingers trembling as worry rushed through him. "This is Barnes in monitoring," he said, trying to steady his voice. "We've got a lioness in trouble. South Prairie Sector 4. She's not breathing. Ridge is with her, but he's not acting mean. He looks—" Theo stopped himself. He didn't know how to describe it. Not desperate, not confused. Something deeper. Something almost human. "You need to see this." Calling primary field responder. Static crackled through the line for a moment. Then a calm, steady voice answered. "Copy that, Theo. This is Emma. Sending location to my tablet. Keep eyes on them." Relief washed over him. If anyone could understand what was happening, it was Emma Caldwell. She had a way of seeing beyond the surface, of hearing the things animals didn't say. Theo replayed the last few seconds of footage again, and each time the same dread settled heavier in his stomach. The lioness wasn't breathing, not fully. And Ridge looked like someone watching the world slip away. "Emma," he said again through the radio, voice cracking slightly, "her vitals are crashing." She stopped breathing for at least 5 seconds, maybe more. "Stay with her," Emma replied. "I'm on my way." On the screen, the lioness's body twitched once, then became completely still. Theo leaned so close his breath fogged the monitor. "Come on, don't do this." Ridge lowered himself beside her, curling protectively around her shoulders, his huge body shaking with each rough breath. The prairie wind carried tufts of his mane, as if the land itself wanted to comfort him. Theo swallowed hard. This wasn't nature in balance. This wasn't instinct taking its course. This was a family in crisis. He typed timestamps, logged the lioness's last movements, and checked oxygen levels in the area, desperate for anything that could help Emma when she arrived. But deep down, he already knew this was no ordinary birthing problem. The lioness's sides did not rise again. Her eyes stayed closed, lashes dusted with frost. Ridge touched his forehead to hers, the gesture heartbreakingly gentle for a creature of his size. Theo stood up suddenly from his chair. He couldn't just sit there while Ridge silently begged the morning sun for a miracle. His throat tightened with a frustration he couldn't name. Maybe it was the helplessness of watching something suffer just beyond reach. Or maybe it was the way Ridge never looked away from his mate, even when she no longer responded. On the radio, Emma's voice returned, slightly breathless. "Theo, I need clarity. Is she still alive?" He looked at the screen again, hoping something had changed in those few seconds, but nothing had. I don't know," he whispered. "She hasn't moved since the last contraction." Emma didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was different. Lower, weighted, but steady, like someone stepping into a familiar storm. "Keep watching. I'll be there in minutes. Tell Avery to prep field trauma gear." Theo pressed his palms against the desk, grounding himself. Outside the monitoring cabin, the wind swept across the frosted prairie, carrying a stillness that felt almost like a warning. On the screen, Ridge lifted his head. He stared directly into the camera, as if somehow he knew he was being watched. As if begging whoever was out there to understand his plea. Theo whispered, "Help is coming, big guy. Just hang on." He didn't know if Ridge could hear him. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe all Ridge needed was the truth of the moment, that he wasn't alone in this. As the first sliver of sun broke across the horizon, lighting the prairie in shades of pink and orange, Theo felt something shift inside him. This was no longer just a surveillance feed. No longer lines of data. This was life on the edge. A lioness slipping away. A father refusing to let go. And somewhere beyond the hills, Emma Caldwell racing against the clock. The screen flickered once as the wind hit the pole-mounted camera. For a heartbeat, everything blurred, then sharpened again, showing Ridge lifting his head toward the distant sound of an engine. Faint, but growing closer. "Emma," Theo said softly, watching the lion rise with trembling determination. "He hears you." A moment later, through the radio, her voice replied, a quiet promise wrapped in steel. "Then let's not waste another second." The road leading into the South Prairie curved like a pale ribbon through the waking landscape, its gravel crunching beneath Emma Caldwell's truck as she pushed the engine harder than she normally would. The winter sun had barely begun melting the frost along the fence lines, leaving the world painted in soft silver. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, not out of panic, but determination. She had heard Theo's voice break through the radio only minutes earlier, carrying a mix of fear and hope that she knew all too well. In her years on the rescue team, she had learned to tell panic from urgency, fear from truth. But today, what she heard was something deeper. A plea from the wilderness itself. Her tablet mounted on the dashboard displayed a blinking marker showing Ridge and the unmoving lioness. The GPS pulsed gently as the vehicle bounced along the uneven trail, reminding her she was closing in, that every second mattered. Emma breathed in slow and steady, grounding herself the way she used to before stepping into trauma rooms during her ICU days. Those memories were always there. Clean hallways, the soft beeping of heart monitors, the brief silence before a life slipped away. She had walked away from that world years ago, but its echoes lived quietly in her bones. "Not this time," she murmured. "Not today." A hand gripped the passenger handle as Dr. Avery Miles steadied himself during a sharp turn. He'd been reviewing emergency medicine doses and vital check rules on his clipboard, his eyebrows wrinkled behind silver-framed glasses. Avery was calm in a way that seemed almost unshakable, but Emma could sense the tension beneath his quiet focus. Cases involving large predators always demanded precision, both from the medical team and from nature's unpredictable instincts. "You think she's still alive?" Avery asked, his voice low but steady. Emma didn't look away from the road. "I don't know, but Ridge is still there." "That means something. It means he hasn't given up." Her voice softened. "And if he hasn't, neither will we." The truck went down a small hill, the prairie spreading before them like an ocean of frost-tipped grass. The air here felt different, sharper, quieter, as if the wind itself knew to move carefully. Theo's radio updates came in from time to time, keeping them informed of every small twitch, every hint of movement, every second the lioness remained still. "Ridge just stood up again," Theo said over the radio. "He's watching the road now, like he knows you're close." Emma felt something stir in her chest. Ridge was a powerful animal. She had watched him from a distance for years. He was a leader, a guard of his territory. To hear that he had stopped being aggressive entirely, replaced with a strange, waiting stillness, was something she couldn't ignore. "We're coming, boy," she whispered under her breath. A second truck followed behind, carrying Theo and extra medical gear. Through the side mirror, Emma saw him leaning forward in his seat, as if that would somehow make the trucks move faster. His concern didn't surprise her. Theo wore his heart openly, something she found comforting in a job where emotional walls often tightened into armor. The truck slowed as the ground turned uneven, shaped by years of wind and animal trails. Emma eased off the gas, allowing the engine to quiet. A hush settled over the prairie. Even Avery paused mid-sentence, looking out through the windshield as if sensing the weight of the moment pulling them in. Then she saw him. Ridge stood beside the still form of the lioness, his dark mane catching the faint breeze. Even from a distance, Emma could feel the weight of his presence, the raw tension coiled beneath his skin, the desperate longing in his posture. Ridge looked nothing like the strong male she had watched from afar through binoculars countless times before. This Ridge was different, vulnerable, waiting. "Slow," Emma whispered, though she was already easing the truck to a crawl. They rolled forward until Ridge lifted his head and locked his gaze on them. His eyes held no anger, no warning flash, only a silent question that went straight through her. Avery exhaled. "I've never seen a lion do that." Emma nodded once, her throat tightening. Ridge took a single step forward, testing the air between them, judging their intent. Emma responded by cutting the engine and letting the quiet settle. She opened the door slowly, stepping out into the cold morning light, her boots pressing into frost, the blades of grass crackling beneath her weight. She raised her hands slightly, not high enough to signal a threat, just high enough to show she carried nothing but purpose. "Easy," she whispered to the wind, though her voice carried toward Ridge. The lion's pupils widened for a moment as he judged her presence. His huge chest rose with a deep, trembling breath, and then, amazingly, he stepped aside. Not backward, not in fear, but in a clear gesture that almost felt like an invitation. Emma's heart clenched. She had seen trust before. In dogs, in horses, in animals who shared space with humans every day. But this was something else entirely. A wild king lowering his guard for a chance at saving the love of his life. She approached slowly, never breaking eye contact until the last few steps brought the lioness into view. Ridge stood near her side, watching every move. Emma knelt, the cold seeping into her knees as she gently touched the lioness's side. The stillness beneath her hand was immediate, unsettling. No rise, no fall. "She's not breathing," she whispered. Avery knelt beside her, already checking for pulse, reflex, anything that might tie the lioness to life. Emma leaned closer, pressing 2 fingers beneath the jawline with practiced care. Nothing. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle. Ridge moved just a bit, but Emma felt the rumble of his breath ripple through the ground. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Give me a moment," she said softly. The prairie wind carried her words gently, almost kindly. Ridge's ears twitched, but he did not interfere. He merely sat back, lowering himself closer to the earth, as though grounding the lioness with his presence. Emma swallowed hard. So much rode on moments like these, the fragile space between survival and loss, the thin line where instinct met hope, and she knew exactly what came next. "We can still try," she murmured to Avery. Her hands steadied, her breath deepened, and as the sun lifted another inch above the horizon, Emma Caldwell stepped fully into the role the wilderness had just trusted her with. Ridge shifted his weight as Emma and Avery knelt beside the lioness, the cold morning air swirling around them like a living presence. The lion's huge shoulders trembled each time he breathed, but he did not come closer. Not yet. His eyes, golden like melted metal under the rising sun, moved between Emma's face and the lifeless body of his mate. The wind tugged gently at his mane, scattering strands of dark hair across the frost, as if nature itself tried to comfort him. Emma felt that small, almost invisible spark inside her, the one that rose only in the rarest of moments when she sensed she was crossing into an unspoken agreement with the wild. She whispered to Avery, "Prepare the stim kit. We don't have long." Avery nodded and opened the bag beside him, pulling out the small portable medical tools they used for emergency wildlife response. The soft beeping of the oxygen scanner broke the silence for a moment. It sounded oddly out of place against the vast, breathless prairie. Emma leaned closer to the lioness, adjusting the angle of her head in hopes of detecting the faintest spark of breathing, but still nothing. Her fingertips brushed the lioness's chest, feeling only stillness. Ridge responded instantly. His head dipped, then rose again, a sharp breath shuddering through him. Emma froze where she was. She could feel Ridge's uncertainty buzzing in the air like electricity. One wrong move, and they could break the fragile understanding forming between them. "It's okay," she murmured softly. Not moving, not blinking. "I'm here to help her." For a long, stretched heartbeat, Ridge held himself completely stiff. Then something in his gaze shifted. The wildness did not disappear, but something older, quieter surfaced beneath it. Something that seemed to beg her to continue. His body sank lower into the frost, muscles easing ever so slightly as he stepped back half a step. He bowed his head, the movement subtle yet unmistakably careful, as though offering Emma access to the one thing he would have died to protect. Avery's breath caught. "I can't believe what I'm seeing." Neither could Emma. She had studied lion behavior for years, watched countless rescues unfold, but she had never seen a moment like this. Ridge wasn't giving up territory. He wasn't submitting. He was trusting. Trusting a stranger with the life that mattered most to him. It was a gesture that didn't belong in any textbook or field manual, something no documentary had ever truly captured. It was understanding, grief, and a kind of ancient love that existed only in the spaces where words could not reach. Emma glanced at Avery and he nodded, signaling that he was ready. Their movements were careful and smooth. She positioned the airway tool along the lioness's jawline, her gloved hands steady despite the cold biting into her knuckles. The lioness's fur, damp from strain and morning frost, felt fragile beneath her fingers, like fabric worn thin over time. "Come on," Emma whispered. "Stay with us." The tool delivered a gentle pulse. The lioness's chest twitched almost invisibly. Ridge lurched forward instinctively, but Emma lifted one hand in a calming gesture. His paws pressed into the ground as if holding him there, his breath heavy in the silent air. Emma repeated the pulse. Another twitch. And then the faintest shudder rolled beneath the lioness's ribs. "I've got movement," she breathed. Avery leaned in, checking vitals quickly. Minimal, but real. "She's right on the edge." Emma felt her heart jump. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was a door cracked open. A chance. Ridge's entire posture shifted as he noticed the tiny flicker of life. He leaned forward, lowering his head until his nose hovered only inches from his mate's shoulder. A rumble escaped him, low, trembling, filled with a depth of emotion that made Emma's eyes sting unexpectedly. She had heard lions roar, growl, snarl. But this sound was different. This was a voice made of love and fear twisted together. The prairie seemed to hold its breath with them. The lioness stirred again, only slightly, but the motion was enough to make Ridge rise onto his front paws. His shadow fell across Emma, not threatening, but protective, silently urging her to continue. She placed the tool aside and shifted her hand to the lioness's belly. The muscles were tight with strain. Birth was happening, but dangerously. The contractions had stopped too long, and her body was giving up. "We need to ease the pressure before she stops again," Emma said quietly. "If we don't, neither she nor the cubs will make it." Avery began preparing the emergency shot as Emma checked the lioness's condition the same way she once checked patients in hospital beds, listening not only to the body but to the silence surrounding it. The wind brushed past them, and for a fleeting moment she felt her former life meeting this one. Back then she had lost people she couldn't save. But here, in this vast open world, she was being given another chance to do what she couldn't before. Ridge's tail moved slowly behind him, sweeping arcs into the frost. He watched Emma's hands, watched the lioness's small movements, watched the air itself for any sign of change. Every breath he took seemed to echo with unspoken fear. Emma felt it echo inside her. The weight of what this meant, not just to the family, but to the land itself. A king who bowed was a king who loved. She positioned herself for the next step, her knees cold against the hard earth. "Avery, I need you on her side." We're going to shift her position and open room for the next contraction. He moved into place immediately, their teamwork smooth. Frost crackled beneath them as they worked, the lioness's body trembling faintly with each adjustment. Then, almost like a miracle, a weak contraction rippled through her belly. "There you go," Emma whispered, voice trembling with relief. "Fight with us." The contraction faded, but it brought with it a hint of warmth, proof that the lioness had not fully given up. Avery repositioned the shot while Emma brushed a strand of grass from the lioness's face, her touch gentle, respectful. Ridge leaned closer than before, so close that Emma could feel the heat of his breath on her shoulder. He was no longer only watching. He was urging her forward, willing her to do whatever was necessary. His presence, huge yet fragile, wrapped around them like a shield. Emma looked into his eyes, seeing a silent promise there. "We're not giving up on her," she said softly. The prairie wind stirred, lifting its voice through the grass as if answering her promise. Emma pressed her palm against the lioness's chest one more time, feeling for that fragile rhythm. It was faint, but faint was enough. She drew in a breath, steady and certain. "Let's begin," she said, and with Ridge standing over them, bowed in trust, Emma took the next step into the fight for a life nature was not yet finished with. "Let's begin," Emma said, her voice steady despite the cold threading through her gloves and settling deep into her bones. The words seemed to ripple outward, carried across the prairie by a soft gust of wind that stirred the frost along the lioness's fur. Ridge lifted his head slightly as if he understood those three quiet words were the dividing line between giving up and fighting back, between losing his family and risking everything to keep them whole. Emma shifted her position at the lioness's side, guiding Avery as he adjusted the injection angle. The lioness's body was warm but fading, her breaths shallow and uneven. Every few seconds, a quiver pulsed beneath her ribs, a fragile signal that life had not yet fully slipped away. Emma leaned closer, her ear hovering above the lioness's nose, listening for a trace of air. A faint exhale brushed against her cheek, weak, but real. It was the smallest breath imaginable, but to Emma, it felt like a door holding itself open by the thinnest hinge. Avery injected the medicine with precise care. "This should help trigger another contraction," he murmured. Emma nodded, but kept her gaze on the lioness's face. Her whiskers were dusted with frost, eyelashes clumped slightly from effort. She looked exhausted beyond anything the human world could name. Yet beneath the stillness lay something fierce, a quiet refusal to let go. "Come on, girl. Stay with us," Emma whispered. Ridge responded instantly. A deep rumble vibrated through his chest, not aggressive, but coaxing. A low, trembling call directed toward his mate. He lowered his huge head, almost brushing Emma's shoulder. She froze for a heartbeat, aware of the size beside her, aware of how easily the wild could change its mind. But the rumble didn't grow into a growl. It softened as if Ridge was trying to breathe for her, to summon strength she no longer had. The lioness's belly tightened faintly. A contraction, weak, slow, but undeniably there. Emma's pulse jumped, and Avery leaned in, adjusting her position to guide the motion. "There it is," he said quietly. "She's responding." The prairie seemed to lean in with them. Even the wind hushed. The lioness's body trembled as another contraction struggled its way through her. She tried to shift her back legs, but the effort collapsed midway, her muscles too worn out to carry out what instinct demanded. Emma steadied her, supporting the weight gently with both hands. "Easy. We've got you," she murmured. The next moment struck like a blow. Her breaths, faint but present moments earlier, faltered again. The rise of her chest slowed, paused, then failed to return. "No," Emma breathed. She pressed her fingers against the lioness's throat again. Nothing. A hollow, painful stillness replaced the fragile rhythm she'd been clinging to. Ridge jolted upright, his body stiffened, and for one terrifying moment, Emma felt his power radiate through the air like heat from a wildfire. He stepped closer, towering over her, pupils blown wide with panic. Avery tensed behind her, ready to step in if Ridge lunged, but Emma didn't move away. She raised one hand, slow, controlled, open, and let Ridge see her face fully. "Let me help her," she whispered. The wind seemed to freeze. Ridge inhaled sharply, the sound breaking at the edges. His breath trembled as he looked down at Emma, searching her eyes for something he could recognize. Truth, mercy, intention. What he found there made his shoulders lower just barely. His huge weight shifted backward, paws retreating inches in the frost. It was permission. Terrifying. Impossible permission. Emma sprang into action. She positioned both hands along the lioness's ribcage and began rhythmic compressions, gentle, precise, adjusted for wildlife body structure. Avery monitored vitals, calling out intervals. The world narrowed to the small space beneath Emma's hands and the deafening silence pressing in from every direction. She counted each movement, grounding herself in the familiar rhythm her ICU training had burned into her years ago. Come on, she whispered between compressions. A faint spasm rippled through the lioness's side. Emma felt it under her palms and didn't dare breathe. Avery, did you see that? He leaned in again. Keep going. Emma continued, her breath sinking with each push, her heart pounding with an intensity that blurred everything else. Ridge lowered himself close, the heat of his body brushing against her back. His face hovered beside the lioness's shoulder, eyes tracking her every motion. He was waiting, hoping to see the impossible become possible. Then it happened. A shallow, broken inhale fluttered from the lioness's throat, fragile as the sound of frost cracking at dawn. Yes, Emma exhaled. Come back to us. A second breath followed, weak, wavering, but unmistakably alive. Emma's shoulders sagged with relief, and Avery let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She's not stable yet, he cautioned, but she's here for now. Emma nodded, blinking away the sting of tears that had gathered without her noticing. She brushed the lioness's fur softly, grounding her back into the world. We're not losing you today. Not after everything you fought for. The lioness stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering just enough to reveal a sliver of amber beneath. Ridge leaned closer, nudging her gently with his nose. His touch was so delicate that Emma felt her chest tighten with emotion. This was not the touch of a predator. It was the touch of a partner, a guardian, a soul bound to another by something far older than instinct. The lioness released a small sound, a whisper of breath shaped into something like acknowledgement. Ridge's eyes widened, shimmering with quiet relief. He lowered his head beside hers, and for a moment the two shared the faintest echo of a reunion neither was certain they would ever see again. Emma rose slowly to coordinate the next steps. Avery, her contractions are still too weak. We need to ease the blockage now, or we'll lose the cubs in her. Avery nodded, already preparing the temporary field equipment. The lioness needed immediate help before exhaustion overwhelmed her again. Time was closing in on them rapidly. As Emma turned back to Ridge, his gaze met hers, a silent agreement passing between them. He would allow her to do what needed to be done. He would put aside every instinct to protect his family, trusting her with the most fragile moment of their lives. In that fragile, breath-steeped stillness between the living and the lost, Emma saw a truth that anchored her. Sometimes the wild did not fight against humans. Sometimes, when the world narrowed to love and fear, it bowed, not in surrender, but in hope. With Ridge watching over her and the prairie holding its breath, Emma prepared for the most delicate part of the rescue. The prairie felt impossibly vast as Emma prepared herself for the next step, its frozen breath drifting around her like a veil. Ridge remained close, so close she could feel the warmth rising from his huge frame, warming the cold air at her back. His presence had shifted. The trembling urgency was still there, but beneath it lay something steadier, a determination that mirrored her own. His mate had returned from the brink once, but this time the fight ahead would demand even more from both human and wild. "We need a field station here," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the stillness. Avery was already unloading equipment from the truck Theo had brought up behind them. The young technician hopped out with a large tarp and insulated blankets, his face pale but determined. "Tell me where you want it," Theo said. "Here," Emma replied, marking a space beside the lioness, "far enough to work, close enough that Ridge wouldn't panic." Theo spread the tarp with quick, nervous movements, the frost crackling softly beneath it. The sun had risen higher, but it offered no warmth. Instead, it sharpened every shadow, turning the lioness's fragile shape into a stark reminder of how close she'd come to being lost. Avery knelt beside Emma and checked the lioness's belly again, pressing gently along the strained muscles. "The blockage hasn't shifted enough. Her body can't push past it on its own. We'll need to ease the pressure manually." Theo swallowed hard. "Out here, without a table, without lights?" Emma met his eyes. "We work with what we have. Lives don't wait for perfect conditions." He nodded, though his hands trembled slightly as he passed her the cleaner. Ridge watched every move, his ears flicking at the soft clinks of metal instruments. Emma kept her body language slow and open, letting him see there were no threats, only purpose. When she reached toward the lioness again, Ridge lowered his head, sniffing the air around her hands. The gesture was gentle, a silent recognition of her intention. Morning wind swept across the plain, lifting loose strands of Emma's hair. She breathed in deeply, letting the scent of winter grass steady her focus. "Avery will start with a surface cut to ease tension. Nothing deep, just enough to give her room to breathe and push." He nodded, preparing the instruments. Emma's gloved fingers brushed the lioness's fur, tracing a line along her side. The animal's breathing remained faint but present. Each inhale shallow, each exhale weakening. Emma whispered softly, "You've come this far. Don't stop now." Whether the lioness heard her or not, Ridge responded instead, a rumble rising from his chest like a promise of support. Avery cleaned the area and Emma positioned herself, knees braced against the cold ground. "Ready," she said. Avery nodded. Theo stepped closer with the portable light panel, angling it carefully so the glare didn't startle Ridge. The lion held perfectly still, his eyes locked on Emma's hands. With slow precision, Emma made the cut. The lioness didn't flinch. The sedative had taken effect, though it was given at the lowest dose possible to avoid crashing her vitals. Avery helped, monitoring her breathing, calling out subtle changes Emma wouldn't see from her position. "There's swelling," Avery murmured. "Careful. The tissue is tight." Emma worked with steady hands, widening the space just enough for internal movement. Her breath floated at the edge of frost as she concentrated, aware of Ridge's protective shadow hovering behind her. A sudden ripple passed through the lioness's belly, weak, but stronger than before. Emma's heart lifted at the sign. "She's contracting again," Theo whispered, awe in his voice. Good, Emma replied. We need her body to join back in. The next contraction rolled through in a slow, uneven wave. Avery supported her belly, gently guiding the motion. Then something shifted beneath Emma's fingertips, a firm, unnatural mass pressing outward. There it is, Emma whispered. The blockage. Working with delicate precision, Emma eased the tissue free. The mass slid into her palm like a weight the lioness had been fighting for hours. Avery's breath hitched. Theo exhaled a soft gasp. Even Ridge leaned closer, eyes wide, sensing the change. Pressures releasing, Avery confirmed. That should help her body take over now. Emma set the blockage aside on a clean cloth. Her heart pulsed with a hopeful rhythm. But hope in the wild was a fragile thing, always waiting for the next test. As if on cue, a new contraction surged, this one stronger. The lioness's side trembled, her muscles fighting to complete what nature had begun. Emma shifted position, supporting gently as Avery encouraged the movement. Something's coming, Avery said. Emma watched as a small form began to emerge, slippery, fragile, limp. A cub. Theo sucked in a breath, the sound sharp as the winter air. The newborn slid free into Emma's hands, its fur slick, its body frighteningly still. No cry, no motion, no breath. Emma felt a cold rush sweep through her. Avery, no breathing. Ridge jerked forward. Emma quickly lifted one hand, keeping her voice low but firm. Easy. Let me help him. Ridge froze, muscles trembling violently beneath his mane. Emma cradled the newborn close, positioning her fingers along its tiny chest. The cub weighed almost nothing, as though the wind might lift him away. She tilted him gently, clearing his airway, then began rhythmic compressions with her thumb, careful not to apply too much pressure. Come on, little one, she whispered. Fight with me. Avery monitored the lioness, whose breathing had steadied slightly since the blockage's removal. She lay motionless but alive, her body spent yet responding. Emma continued the compressions, counting under her breath, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. 10 seconds. 15. The cub remained still. Theo's grip tightened around the light panel. Ridge pressed himself lower to the ground, a sound building in his chest. Not a roar, but a broken plea. The prairie wind died completely as if the world itself held still, waiting. Emma lowered her face closer to the cub. Please, she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Just one breath. And then, like the softest spark, the cub's chest gave a tiny shudder. Again, Emma urged. Another tremble, then the faintest, fragile squeak. Small, wavering, but unmistakably alive. Theo cried out softly. Avery released a breath of disbelief. Ridge rose onto his paws, eyes burning with renewed energy. He's breathing, Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Welcome to the world, little fighter. She wrapped the cub in a warm cloth, holding him close to her chest as his tiny body continued its uneven breaths. Ridge leaned forward, his huge head lowering until his nose nearly brushed the cub's back. Emma held still, letting Ridge's presence wash over the newborn like a blessing. The lioness gave a soft, exhausted exhale, her body relaxing at last. Emma looked at Avery, her eyes shining. She's stable enough for now, but we need to deliver the others safely. Avery nodded, preparing for the next phase of the birth. The sky above them stretched wide and endless, but the world felt impossibly small, contained in the fragile space where one family fought its way back into the light. Emma held the tiny cub close to her chest, feeling the faint, uneven flickers of breath against the fabric of her jacket. The newborn's fur, still damp from birth, shimmered pale as morning light touched it, almost silver, almost frost-like, as if the prairie itself had given him a piece of its winter sky. Ridge lowered his head beside her, his whiskers brushing the cold air near the cub as he hovered protectively, though he never stepped closer than Emma allowed. His restraint was astonishing, a sign of the fragile trust forged in these impossible minutes. Behind her, Avery adjusted the lioness's position, supporting her with blankets. Theo slid beneath her side. Her breathing, though faint, had steadied enough to carry another contraction. It rolled through her body in a trembling wave, and Avery leaned in. "She's responding again," he said. "This one's stronger." Emma glanced back at the lioness, still cradling the first cub. His tiny body was warming gradually, small limbs twitching with the early spark of life. The sight filled her chest with an ache she couldn't name. Pride, relief, wonder, maybe all mixed into something too deep to separate. She handed the cub carefully to Theo, who held him close in a warmed cloth, his eyes wide with a compassion he didn't try to hide. "You're doing great," Emma told him. Theo nodded, breathless. Ridge's attention shifted to his mate as a new tension tightened. Through her belly, the prairie grass rustled faintly around them, though the wind itself seemed to hesitate, unwilling to interrupt. Emma moved back to the lioness's side, her hands steady as she prepared for the next delivery. The lioness let out a faint, exhausted sigh, but her body responded with another contraction. "That's it," Emma murmured. "Keep fighting." A second cub appeared, this one larger and more lively the moment he entered the world. He wriggled instinctively, releasing a surprisingly sharp cry that cut through the silence like a spark of fire. Ridge jerked slightly, startled by the sudden sound, then lowered himself closer to the earth as if grounding his emotions. Emma lifted the cub gently, clearing his airway with practiced movements. His cries strengthened, echoing across the frosted plains. Avery allowed himself a small smile. "That's a healthy one." Emma placed the newborn into a clean cloth, letting him settle into Theo's arms where the first cub rested. Frost, the pale one, let out a faint squeak at the sound of his sibling's cry as if trying to answer. Theo laughed softly. "He hears him." Emma felt something warm unfurl inside her. These delicate connections, the way life reached toward life, even moments after arriving in a harsh world, never stopped amazing her. The lioness shuddered once more. Avery looked toward Emma, his voice steady. "One more." Emma nodded. Ridge's gaze tracked their every movement, heavy with intensity, but softened by something deeper. A longing to be part of this moment, yet understanding his role was to wait. The third cub came more quickly, driven by a final surge of effort from the exhausted mother. He emerged with a quiet whimper, smaller than the second, but stronger than frost, his body trembling as he was brought into the cold air. Emma cleaned him quickly and wrapped him in cloth before handing him to Theo, whose arms were now full of new life. "That's all three," Avery confirmed. "And she's still with us." Emma placed a gentle hand on the lioness's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "They're here." The lioness's eyes fluttered open for a moment, not fully, just enough for a glimmer of recognition to pass through them. She exhaled a soft, weary breath. Ridge leaned close, his nose brushing her fur. Emma stepped back slightly, giving him space. The lioness barely shifted, but her breathing deepened as though the presence of her mate anchored her soul, reminding her what she had to return to. Avery began cleaning the cut area, applying pressure wraps with practiced hands. Emma helped stabilize the lioness's position, mindful of her weakened state. Frost let out a faint cry again, and Theo adjusted his hold, offering warmth. As the cub fought to stay tied to life, Emma watched him closely. Frost's movements were small, delicate, but determined. His pale coat gleamed under the sun's growing brightness, catching the light in a way the others didn't. Something about him tugged at her heart, perhaps because he had hovered closest to the edge. Perhaps because he seemed to see the world, even with his eyes barely open. "Strong little guy," she whispered. Avery secured the last of the wrappings. "She needs intensive care," he said. "We stabilized her, but she won't survive here." Emma nodded. "We'll transport her carefully." Ridge stood taller at the word transport, the shift in his posture unmistakable. Emma stepped toward him slowly, her palms open, her voice low. "We need to take her to help her. Your cubs, too. You've trusted us this far. I need you to trust us a little more." Ridge didn't move. His breath fogged in the cold air, but his eyes didn't flash with aggression. They softened toward his mate, toward the tiny sounds coming from Theo's arms, toward the woman who had pulled life from the brink twice in a single morning. He took a step back. A gift of space. A gift of surrender. Emma felt a tightness break in her chest, replaced by relief so deep it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. They prepared the stretcher. Together, Emma and Avery lifted the lioness with great care, sliding her onto soft blankets. Her body was warm, but fragile, each breath still an effort. Theo followed with the cubs, holding them close as they whimpered softly, unaware of how narrow the passage into their new world had been. Emma placed Frost into a small insulated crate lined with warming packs. The cub blinked, his tiny eyelids parting just enough for her to see a glimmer of pale blue beneath. Unusual, beautiful, fierce in a quiet, fragile way. "You're staying with us," she whispered. "I'm not letting you go." Ridge trotted beside them as they carried the lioness toward the truck. His steps steady, his posture alert, but calm. He did not challenge them. He did not roar. He simply walked as though escorting them, unwilling to let his family leave his sight. Theo glanced at Emma. "Is he coming with us?" Emma looked back at the lion, his golden eyes reflecting the winter sun. "I think," she said softly, "he's making sure we don't abandon them." As they loaded the lioness into the vehicle, Frost let out a faint cry from the warming crate. Ridge's ears perked instantly. He stepped closer, nose lowering toward the sound. Emma froze, watching carefully. But Ridge didn't lunge. He didn't show his teeth. He simply listened. And for one suspended moment, the world narrowed to the soft cry of a cub born from the winter sky, and the father who recognized his voice without ever having heard it before. The road to the rehabilitation center wound through the foothills like a pale ribbon, the truck moving at a careful crawl as Emma monitored the lioness's vitals. Each bump, each shift of the vehicle made her hold her breath, watching for any sign of distress. The lioness lay on her side, wrapped in warming blankets, her breath steady but fragile, as though each one was borrowed from a place just beyond reach. Beside Emma, Avery kept a hand on the oxygen mask, adjusting its position whenever the lioness stirred. Behind them, Theo sat cradling the 3 cubs in insulated carriers. The 2 stronger ones slept fitfully, their tiny bodies rising and falling with rhythmic trust. But Frost, ever the fighter, remained restless, making small searching cries that scratched at Emma's heart every time she heard them. It was as though he already sensed something missing, some presence that had guided him into life, but wasn't inside this truck with them. Outside, Ridge followed. At first, Emma thought he would stop when the land grew unfamiliar, but he didn't. His huge paws pressed into the snow-dusted earth with relentless determination. His pace measured to match the slow roll of the rescue vehicle. Whenever the truck dipped into a valley or swerved behind a rock outcropping, he reappeared moments later along a parallel rise, eyes fixed on the moving metal box that carried his family. He never roared, never challenged. He simply followed, as if tied by something deeper than instinct. When they reached the center's outer fence, he stopped. Ridge planted himself at the boundary where the wild ended and the human world began, his gaze tracking the truck until it disappeared around the corner. Emma caught a glimpse of him through the rear window, standing in the snow like a guard carved from gold and shadow. "He's not leaving," Theo murmured, awe softening his voice. "How does he even know they're safe here?" Emma didn't answer. She wasn't sure she had one. All she knew was that Ridge's presence carved itself into her memory, a reminder that some bonds defied lines on a map. The admissions team rushed to meet them at the loading bay, helping transfer the lioness to an intensive care space. The cubs were carried to the newborn warming room, their small bodies immediately surrounded by controlled heat and gentle monitoring equipment. Frost's cries echoed faintly down the hallway as Emma walked beside him, her gloved hand resting atop the carrier. "He's underweight," the on-duty veterinarian noted. "Breathing rate is unstable, but he's responding to warmth. This one's a fighter." Emma nodded. "He was barely breathing when he arrived. He wants to be here." The veterinarian smiled softly. "Then we'll help him stay." Over the next hours, the team stabilized the lioness. She drifted in and out of sedation, her ears twitching at faint sounds only she could sense. Emma watched from behind the glass, exhausted, but unwilling to leave. The cubs slept, fed, cried, and slept again. The building hummed with heaters and quiet voices. And somewhere beyond the wide, snowy field outside, Ridge waited. By dawn the next morning, Emma returned to the observation deck overlooking the outer fence. The sky glowed pale lavender, a veil of early morning light stretching across the prairie. She sipped lukewarm coffee as she scanned the horizon, mostly out of habit, partly out of hope. Then she saw him. A lone silhouette appeared at the edge of the reserve boundary, mane rippling like smoke in the wind. Ridge stood utterly still, facing the facility with an expression Emma could only interpret as watchfulness. He didn't pace. He didn't call out. He simply stayed there as though guarding the invisible thread connecting him to his family. As the sun rose, his golden coat caught the light. Emma felt her breath catch. He came back. When she went inside to check on Frost, the cub stirred the moment she entered the room. His tiny ears perked, his nose twitching as though catching a scent carried on non-existent wind. Then he made a soft, urgent sound, one that didn't match hunger or discomfort. Emma walked to the window. Ridge was still there. Frost cried louder. Emma froze. "No way," she whispered. The vet beside her blinked in confusion. "What is it?" "He knows," Emma said. "He knows his father is out there." From that moment, a pattern formed. Every morning, just before sunrise, Ridge arrived at the same place along the fence line. And every morning, Frost responded the moment the lion's silhouette touched the horizon. Sometimes the tiny cub wiggled, sometimes he lifted his head despite his fragility. Sometimes he cried out, soft but insistent, a sound like the echo of something ancient. The stronger cubs didn't react at all. Only Frost. On the third morning, Ridge settled onto his haunches, never turning away from the building. His breath rose in soft plumes as he watched the facility begin its daily rhythm. Emma stood outside with her coat pulled tight around her, observing him through the fence. Ridge's eyes met hers across the cold expanse, and for a moment she felt as though the lion's gaze pierced straight through her layers of exhaustion and fear. "He's not giving up," she murmured. Avery walked up beside her, rubbing his hands for warmth. "Neither are you." They shared a quiet moment, both watching the lion, who refused to abandon hope. Emma didn't fully understand the depth of Ridge's patience until the fifth morning when snow fell heavily across the plains. The wind whipped against her coat, stinging her cheeks. But when she reached the observation window, Ridge was already there, his mane dusted white, his body braced against the storm, still waiting, still watching. Inside the newborn unit, Frost trembled weakly at the sight. Emma picked him up, holding him close. "He's out there for you," she whispered. She felt silly talking to a creature so small he could fit into her 2 hands. But the cub blinked, tried to lift his head, and reached out with his fragile paw toward the glass. It was enough. She knew. By the end of the week, Frost had grown stronger. Still tiny, still fragile, but with a fierceness burning at the center of him. His breaths came easier. His cries grew louder. His coat had dried into a soft, pale shimmer, catching even the faintest light like morning frost forming along window edges. The lioness, too, began to stir. Her breaths deepened, her tail twitching faintly any time her cub's cries echoed through the ward. Emma watched her carefully, seeing the slow reawakening of instinct, the way her muscles tried to move, even before her strength fully returned. "She's getting ready," Avery said one night as they reviewed her charts. "Ready for what?" Emma asked. He smiled gently. "To go home." Emma looked through the glass at the recovering family, then toward the fence, where Ridge would soon appear again at dawn. Her chest tightened with anticipation. Not fear, not uncertainty, but the quiet stretch of hope that rises after long, sleepless nights spent fighting for life. "We'll bring them back to him," she whispered. But she had no idea just how powerful that homecoming would be. The morning of the release arrived with a sky washed in soft lavender, the kind of dawn that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Emma stood outside the rehabilitation center, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air as she watched the horizon brighten. The lioness had regained enough strength to stand, though still shakily, her limbs trembling with the ghosts of exhaustion. She blinked slowly at the open enclosure gate, ears flicking at the faint rustle of the prairie grass beyond. Her cubs, 2 lively, stumbling bodies and 1 pale, determined fighter, clustered near her legs, nudging at her with tiny insistent motions. Frost was the last to rise. He blinked sleepily at the morning light, as though still learning how to see the world he had fought so fiercely to enter. His coat shimmered faintly with a silver shade that caught even the most delicate strands of sunlight. He wobbled toward his mother and pressed himself against her, letting her warmth gather around him like a shield. Avery approached Emma with the final health clearances. "She's ready," he said. "A little weak, but her vitals are stable. She can make the walk." Emma nodded, though a knot tightened in her throat. "And Frost?" Avery smiled softly. "If there's one cub who deserves to return to the wild, it's him." Theo appeared beside them, carrying a portable crate that Frost had slept in during the final nights. The young technician's eyes were shining with quiet pride. "He's stronger by the hour," he said. "He keeps trying to climb out of his bedding like he's racing the sun." Emma smiled. "Then let's not keep him waiting." Together, they guided the lioness toward the exit gate. The metal hinges creaked softly, a sound that felt almost ceremonial. As soon as the breeze swept into the enclosure, the lioness lifted her nose, smelling the open air, the soil she knew, the life calling her back. She stepped forward, then hesitated just beyond the threshold. Theo whispered, "She's looking for him." Emma followed the lioness's gaze to the far field where a familiar figure was already emerging from the fading shadows. Ridge. He moved with a presence that demanded silence, his mane catching the dawn like a crown of fire. He stopped several yards from the boundary, gazing at the scene with an intensity that stilled the air around them. The lioness let out a soft, trembling rumble. Ridge answered with a low call of his own that vibrated through the earth, a sound layered with recognition, relief, and a longing that had held him tied to this place for days. Emma stepped back and opened the gate fully. "Go to him," she whispered. The lioness walked forward, her steps slow but determined. Her cubs scrambled beside her, tumbling over each other in bursts of enthusiasm. Frost lagged slightly behind, his movements smaller, more careful, but his eyes stayed locked on the lion at the horizon. When the lioness reached the open field, Ridge broke into motion. He walked toward her with a deliberate grace, every stride rippling with emotion he could not name. When they finally met, Ridge touched his forehead to hers in a gesture so tender it caught Emma off guard. They stood like that for several long moments, as though nothing else in the world existed. Then Ridge turned toward the cubs. The two stronger ones hopped excitedly around his paws, batting at the tufts of his mane. Ridge nudged them gently, his rumbling breath filled with acceptance. But when Frost approached, Ridge froze, his eyes widening at the sight of the smallest member of his family. Frost let out a quiet, wavering sound, his tail twitching as he inched closer. Emma held her breath. Slowly, Ridge lowered himself until his enormous head rested nearly at Frost's level. The cub lifted one delicate paw and placed it on Ridge's nose, claiming him in the purest way a newborn could. Ridge responded by brushing his nose across Frost's head, a gesture as ancient as the bond between sun and prairie. Emma blinked hard, fighting the sting of tears. Theo exhaled shakily beside her. Avery murmured, "I've never seen anything like that." The lioness gathered her cubs around her, circling them with a protective sweep of her tail. Ridge stood beside her, watching Emma with a gaze that held no aggression. Only gratitude, unspoken, but unmistakably clear. Emma lifted a hand toward him, palm open. She didn't expect him to understand, but Ridge dipped his head slightly, acknowledging her presence in a way that felt almost respectful. Then he turned, guiding his family across the golden stretch of prairie. The cubs followed, two energetic leaps and one determined shuffle, each pressing little footprints into the frost-softened ground. The lioness walked with slow confidence, the warmth of her mate beside her, strengthening each step. Frost trailed at the back, pausing once to glance at Emma, his pale eyes catching the rising sun, glowing with a quiet, enduring fire. Emma felt something settle in her chest, a soft understanding. Survival wasn't just about strength. Sometimes it was about connection, about the invisible threads that weave between beings who were never meant to meet. The family moved farther into the open. Plains, sunlight washing over their backs until their figures dissolved into the horizon, swallowed by the vast embrace of the wild. Theo whispered, "Do you think they'll be okay?" Emma nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the place where the lions disappeared. "They're home. That's all they needed." Avery placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved them, Emma." She shook her head gently. "No," she said softly. "We helped them find each other. They saved themselves." The wind carried her words across the prairie, weaving them into the quiet morning as the world settled into a peaceful hum. Emma turned back toward the facility, her heart full but trembling, knowing she would carry this moment long after footprints faded and seasons changed. Behind her, the sun rose fully, setting the frost aglow. Just as Frost, born from the winter sky, stepped into the life he was destined for. If this story touched your heart, would you leave a simple one in the comments? Just a single number lets me know you were here and that you cared. And if you'd like to stay with us for more real stories of courage, love, and the wild world we share, please subscribe. There are so many journeys ahead, and I'd be honored to have you walking with us.